The earthvox podcast. The earthvox podcast. earthvox podcast.
Well, my goodness, it's an exciting day. It's a very momentous occasion. A red letter day, I think they call it, or they used to call it. Am I showing my age by bringing that up? We have a very special guest today. And I think because of this guest, we also have our first sponsor. That's right. It's time for ads. Of course, it's the next evolution of the show. And I'm so excited for all of you that have supported me up to this point. I appreciate you so much that I will now make you suffer through ad reads, which of course we can blame on our guest, because I think without her, the anticipation of this episode wouldn't be what it is. There's a one-of-a-kind bookstore in Colville. Coffee and Books in Town Center has served the greater Colville area for 24 years as a bookstore with a Christian worldview that carries a unique selection of new and used books. It's not just a Christian bookstore, including history, family living, education, and children's classics. A favorite category is local history, local authors, and local flora and fauna. Coffee and Books in Town Center is a full-service, independent bookstore and is happy to special order books for you. With their own espresso bar, they craft you drinks to be enjoyed as you browse, sit and relax, or take to go. Coffee and Books in Town Center, 298 South Main Street, located in the Town Center building, downtown Colville. And you can reach them by phone at 509-684-3512. Now, without further ado, our guest today started college when she was 13. I think they call that a prodigy. Has a bachelor in political science from Seattle Pacific University, is a journalist, a teacher, and a humanitarian. Marsha Michaelis joins us today. Marsha, welcome.
Well, thanks very much, Eric. Brian. That's a very spectacular introduction.
I'm happy to have you. I've been a fan of radio and talk radio since I went to college, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth. And I cue all of that. I mean, how does Tucker Carlson introduce his guests? Well, that's what I'm going to do. So I can't take all that credit for it. It's monkey see, monkey do. But when I first got in contact with you and I was reading your bio, I was really excited to learn that you worked for or with a think tank, the Freedom Foundation, for 10 years. I have some idea of what I think a think tank does, but I don't really have much of an idea. What's it like working for a think tank, and what is it that a think tank is supposed to accomplish?
Yeah, well, I guess it's exactly like its name. And I feel like we should also at some point address the prodigy label, because I had a unique education, but the reason I'm passionate about talking about my education is because I wasn't a prodigy. And so I love education reform. And in fact, that's what I did for a number of years at what was then called the Evergreen Freedom Foundation over in Olympia, Washington. And basically a think tank exists to develop ideas that can then be put into practice. So we would develop model legislation and, communicate ideas. So one of the big important things is helping people understand, like, how would policy affect people? And so at the Evergreen Freedom Foundation, when I was there, which was about 2000 to 2011, we had several areas of interest. Education reform was for a long time my particular area. How do we make schools better? How do we give parents more options so they can choose and craft an education that works for their kids? But we also did budget and taxes. We did transportation. The Growth Management Act was a big deal, how people can use their land and their property. We had a whole department that was dedicated to, and now actually has become really the main focus of what is now the Freedom Foundation and has become a national think tank, dedicated to dealing with unions that take advantage of their members and then use their dues to, to influence politics, often against their members' wishes. So those were all big issues where if you don't fight those battles, life gets worse for people. So that's really what a think tank does.
I would say I am tentatively pro-union, but not in the context of government and public employees and teachers. I believe that the people, the citizens, should be responsible for mandating the working conditions, the wages, but I mean, I feel like that also needs to be, it's like an issue, I think, specifically that we have with teachers and law enforcement. I think law enforcement and teachers need to be paid. They need to have a full package that attracts the kind of people that we want to have holding those positions, instead of, what I get as to be the case today is we have to operate it as cheaply as possible, because we're spending the bulk of the tax dollars on administration instead of putting it in the pockets of the people that are actually doing the work. And this is where, I mean, some of my ideas probably come off as socialist. I know a lot of people that listen to the show would agree, but I don't consider myself to be a socialist. I like to think that I'm just looking at things from a realistic perspective. If the only thing you're offering a teacher is, $50,000 a year and maybe a nice 3-month vacation during the summer, you're not going to get people that are motivated to offer the best possible situation for their students. And the same goes with law enforcement. You're going to have ex-military with PTSD that doesn't receive the kind of care and training that they need, and you end up with the kind of problems that we see in law enforcement with this. Of course, I will acknowledge that there is a massive problem with the defund the police movement that is happening in blue cities, which I think all just kind of is geared toward contributing to decay and urban decay that I think, I mean, these are my conspiracy theories that we talked about coming into the conversation. A sort of controlled demolition that starts with our cities and eventually envelops our states, and then causes this kind of fracturing that we're seeing across the country, especially, I mean, even today with what's happening in Minnesota and in Portland. It's an absolute tragedy. But to get us back on topic, when did your time with the Freedom Foundation end? What happened there? What sent you on your way?
Sure. Well, and let me just quickly speak to the union issue for a moment.
Of course.
Because there is quite a big difference between public employee unions and private unions, which are, where they're voluntarily organized. So actually one of the big policies that the Freedom Foundation pursues is just the right to work. So you have the right to join your union if it's serving you and the product that you're getting from them is of value to you. In the public sector, though, with public school teachers, it's a monopoly. So you cannot be a teacher without being part of the union. 20 years ago, the average dues per year was about $800 per teacher. So I'm sure it's higher now, which is a significant portion of their salary. They were having, contracts that were bargained every 3 years, so they're paying $2,400 per contract, but most of that money was being used to make donations to political campaigns, to lobby legislators. So really the big idea is simply to leave it up to a teacher, to leave it up to a public employee or any employee, whether or not they want to purchase union services. And then hopefully in the private sector, unions have a good understanding of basic economics, because you really can serve your workers badly if you don't understand how markets work and things like that. You can end up hurting workers. So I'm not against unions, freely formed and a free organization of people. I think that's smart. But how they're run and whether they're run, for the benefit of the employees versus the leaders who rise up into the union's influence positions, and they're really highly paid, so you have your teachers you're talking about who get, salaries that may not attract the best. And then the union officials who might be getting, hundreds of thousands of dollars in salaries. So it's really more, can you use the law, which is what the union is doing, to force a class of people to give money to your organization. And that gets corrupt really quickly, so that was a big part of what we did. So you asked how I came to the Freedom Foundation in 2000. I was a couple years out of college. I'd spent some time over in Washington, D.C. at the National Journalism Center, and just was looking for work back here in my home state, Washington. And so came across this position, which was delightful. It was a dream job. It was, scrappy, ideological. It was just great for all those reasons. But then I got married.
How have your in this moment in your life, how have your politics changed from fresh out of school, coming out of Washington, D.C.? Were you always pretty conservative, or were you like me and kind of liberal, sort of Democrat? I voted for Obama in 2008, and then I really didn't start paying attention and digging into what was going on until about 2015 or 2016. A friend of mine introduced me to Ron Paul, and that kind of got me, that just kind of opened me up to, these are some interesting ideas. Maybe the liberal progressive kind of, because I used to listen to progressive talk radio, and I thought, yeah, these guys know what they're talking about. These evil corporations that just want to fill their pockets. That hasn't disappeared from my sort of worldview. And that's kind of, I think, what also contributes to me being pro-union is I really do believe that companies, especially now, like within the last like 3 or 4 years, are really focused on filling their own pockets in by any and all means necessary. We're going to screw over the customers, we're going to screw over the employees, and we're going to do everything to impact that bottom line in the positive way. And I think unions are one thing that kind of protects the employees to some extent. But I'm sorry, the question was, how have your politics changed?
Sure. Well,
the years.
You'll laugh to know that I was actually more to the right when I was younger. I actually was a card-carrying member of the Libertarian Party for 1 year, until they sent me a thank you note for supporting their Million Marijuana March, which I was like, wait, that doesn't quite jive with, I'm a Christian. And so the problems you described, corporate greed, actually, I'll just throw in there union corruption, all of those stem from the same source, which is human beings who are self-interested, who do what they need to or want to get what they want, and often they will, victimize other people in the process. So libertarianism and progressivism don't have an answer to that problem. Christianity has an answer to that problem, which is in the human heart. So I think that's why I have tempered that libertarian side of me, because there are a lot of human problems that libertarianism just doesn't answer. And homelessness, which is the issue that I've been studying lately, is one of those. The depravity and the suffering in that particular human issue, it's not an issue of freedom for many people. And so libertarianism just doesn't answer. But I love Ron Paul. He was, a congressman when I was out there in D.C. His nickname at the time was Dr. No, because he never would vote to affirm any piece of legislation that he didn't feel was in accordance with the Constitution, which I respect greatly. I like his son, Rand Paul. So I do still have a strong libertarian streak. Individual freedom and the limits that should be placed on government. But I want very much to actually ask those questions, like what is reality? How did God design the world to work, and which policies actually are consistent with the reality that he designed into the universe? So in those ways, I've found that that political philosophy just doesn't quite do it. But
So you just elected to the exit from the Freedom Foundation was amicable. There was no
oh
drama
yeah,
or
kids. Yeah, it was
falling
kids.
out.
So I got married about, let's see, 2006. So about 6 years in. So I kept working for another 5 years. But within 5 years of getting married, my husband and I had four little kids. So it just became, too much, and I wanted to start homeschooling them. So we, educated our kids at home, and my oldest was 5 at the time. So left the office, left the west side of Washington State, and moved over to Stevens County in Northeast Washington, just so our kids would have. We didn't know what to do with them in a cul-de-sac on the west side. We're like, what are these boys gonna do? I have 3 boys and a girl. They could take the garbage like out to the curb, and mow our postage stamp lawn. I'm like, this is not enough to help them grow up with work and to see the realities of life. So we moved over to Stevens County so that they could have a little more space and raise animals. And so that's what we've done. And I've homeschooled them, and now they're all teenagers, and probably ready to have someone else lecture them, which is why I kind of stepped out of some teaching this last year. And so I have other great parent teachers who are, teaching a lot of their classes right now. But that's why I left the Evergreen Freedom Foundation, just because I was ready to focus on kids. So.
And then you connected with the Discovery Institute.
Yeah.
And that's where this this webpage that I'm sharing, if you'd like to watch the video, we are streaming live on X and YouTube and Twitch and Rumble. I have pulled up fixhomelessness.org, and this is what you've been working on and where your efforts are sort of cataloged. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep. A lot of them. And I've been there just since August this year. So even that, I would say, is a pretty steep learning curve. I would answer questions differently today than I would have 3 months ago. The more you learn about something. And Discovery Institute is a Seattle-based think tank. They're a national think tank. They also cover multiple issues. So homelessness is just one of their areas of study. They're probably best known for their work in the science field, origin of life. They have a whole team of scientists from around the world who look at the molecular biology and all of these really fascinating how life is put together and how we're designed. And then they have transportation and economics, and so they have quite a few departments as well. But Discovery, I go way back with. I actually interned at the Discovery Institute in downtown Seattle when I was a college student, because my professor, Dr. John West, has actually been on staff at Discovery for quite a long time, probably since before he was my professor. So that's a long time connection. I've followed their work, and they just happen to be looking for someone to fill this particular role in this Fix Homelessness initiative over the summer, and I had decided to step out of teaching, and so it was a good fit.
So I want to talk about this op-ed that you wrote this week, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yes.
I am okay here. I shared it to my X account, and I am pulling it up here. Why don't you give us the summary? Or I mean, it's not particularly
Oh, yeah.
it wouldn't take a long time to read through. I recommend everyone listening head over to my X page at earthvox and find this. It shouldn't be too many or too far down. In fact, I'll just pin it for you. There you go. Now you can find it right at the top of my X page. Read it for yourself. The title is Op-Ed Homeless Families Outrageous Situation Suggests Unique Remedy. And I have ideas, but why don't you tell us
Oh, good.
what's going on?
Sure. Well, I'll give you a summary of the story. So you can actually see that tent right there. That's a tent that was set up in a public park over in the Seattle area near Aurora Street there. And a 9-year-old boy was living there with his parents, a mother and father. So they're in the public park. Obviously, the conditions are pretty squalid. Neighbors were seeing this boy left in this tent, sometimes all day, sometimes all night by himself. His mother is a fentanyl addict who also prostitutes for money to support this drug addiction. She would bring clients back to the tent, and neighbors would see this 9-year-old boy sitting out in the bushes at night while his mother was, servicing clients in the tent. His father often worked all night. So just a terrible situation where both parents are breaking what should be enforced laws, and that's a big debate right now, is whether or not you should enforce laws against public camping and prostitution, and I would say obvious neglect of a child. So neighbors would offer to help. They would offer to drive the boy to school, but both parents refused any kind of help. They claimed that he was in delayed start homeschool. The dad would claim that he was going to move the family into a motel pretty soon. CPS had been out to this tent. The Seattle police had been out there, and both had concluded that legally there was no basis to remove him from his parents. There's a new law in Washington that was passed a couple of years ago called the Keeping Families Together Act that sets a high bar for removing children. And I agree with that. I think any child who has to be taken away from his parents, I mean, that's trauma.
Yeah, definitely.
For any child. It doesn't even matter. Parents who really can't take care of their child, who really are abusing their child, it's still traumatic for the child to be removed by strangers from his home. So I'm for having a high bar, but obviously this is not a tolerable situation. This is not good for him. The tent was filthy, and so I was thinking about it, and I actually was talking to my 18-year-old son about it. I said, what would you do in this situation? And the first thing he said was, well, I don't think I'd focus on the kid. It's not his fault. We don't need to turn our mind to this 9-year-old and say, what are we going to do with him? Really, the parents need to be addressed, and if possible, the law should uphold this little boy's right to have the dutiful care of his own parents. And so the parents are committing crimes. They are subject to the law. And so why not, what my op-ed suggests is, why not apply the law to that whole family in a compassionate way? Instead of taking him out of the situation where he's going to feel all the trauma of that separation, why not take that whole family and give them the option, and maybe it's an option. You can go to jail for your crimes, or you can be in a family commitment center where you're going to get drug treatment for the mom's addiction, where the dad's going to have some work he can do to help contribute and support. The child can get education. They can all get plenty of nourishment and warmth and counseling. Because as a society, we have all of those pieces right now, but we tend to just apply them to individuals. In the meantime, the kids go through all that trauma. So if these parents are wanting to try to make it work for their son, and they're deep in crime and addiction, I don't know why we shouldn't consider an option that would help that entire family and maintain that child's right to be with his parents.
Well, and that's kind of the sticking point, right? The motivation. I have a lot of experience with addiction, not myself. I'm not an addictive personality. But one of my best friends back when I lived in Portland, was a hopeless, I mean, not hopeless. He got his life together, but he would become addicted to anything. And he would have his electricity shut off and run an extension cord over to his neighbor's house so that he could at least, run a lamp and the TV, because he just couldn't say no. And then he had, his longtime girlfriend was the same way, and she would kind of talk him into making these poor decisions that led to situations like, I don't have any electricity in, I mean, he was a job away from being homeless himself. But I hear, one of my favorites podcasters or podcast team is Adam Carolla and Dr. Drew Pinsky. And Dr. Drew Pinsky was set to be on the homeless commission for Los Angeles, the Los Angeles City Council, but not only was he denied that position, he was also smeared in the LA Times because his perspective on homelessness is that most homelessness exists because of mental illness and addiction, drug abuse. These people want to keep, I mean, his words are that most of these people want to keep using drugs so badly that they have no disregard for themselves or their well-being or their housing situation. They just want to keep using. So they can't go to a shelter because the shelter won't let them continue to use. They have burned all of their bridges with their family and friends because they just want to continue to use, and they will steal from their friends and family and take total advantage because they just want to keep using. How does one create the motivation for people like the parents of this 9-year-old kid to actually clean it up when it would seem, I mean, if you have a 9-year-old kid and you're making him live in a tent, it would seem that your focus is not on raising your child, but on where your next fix comes from. My concern is that we create these programs to benefit these homeless individuals, and they just sort of tell the administrators whatever they think these administrators want to hear so that they can continue to take advantage of the benefits while also continuing their lifestyle of
Right.
depravity and drug abuse.
Right. Well, and you cannot have benefits that come with drugs. And that is the problem with most of our homeless policy today. We have what's called a housing first approach. And the philosophy behind housing first is that homelessness is primarily a housing issue. So really, you just need a house and then you're not homeless anymore. And this really what I'll call a blind faith that if someone has a secure place to live, they're going to start working on themselves. They're going to start doing the really hard work of overcoming addictions and changing patterns of behavior, which is not true. I mean, I think it's really obvious for you and me. We both, every human, we need conditions to live right. And they need to be right conditions, but there are times when I don't want to get up and do what I need to do that day. And it's knowing the consequences of that bad choice, right? That keeps me going on days sometimes when I'd rather lay around all day, or the things we put in our body to eat, right? We have to think ahead to the consequences of our actions. That's true of every human being. So everyone who looks like they're having a healthy life is living conditionally all the time. You go to work, you get paid. If you don't show up for work, your employer shouldn't keep paying you. Well, our current homeless policy at the national level is conditionless, and it's designed to be conditionless, right? And the lie is that that's compassionate. We're going to scoop these people up and give them a free house, and it's permanent subsidized housing. So there's no strings attached, no work requirements, no treatment requirements, but we're going to offer those as a buffet. And all too often they're not offered, so if you actually go and look at what's going on in housing first facilities, it's very management driven. So there might be some good ones out there, but there are a lot of what I'll call hellholes that people are living in. They are not better than the streets. They're just the streets that have been brought inside. And why do we keep these going? Well, there is a lot of money to be made in the homeless housing industry. So I think we actually have to face those realities, that this is actually a self-interested industry, and that we have to be real about human nature. To understand things, I usually try to go back to the very basic. And so I ask myself, like, what is homelessness? Because even the definitions of things matter, And really, if you think about it, healthy humans have homes, right? They have a place where they're secure, where they belong, where they contribute in some positive way to that place. Even an infant contributes in a positive way to his home. And so when someone does not have a home, there's something wrong. Immediately, that's an indicator light, that something is not healthy in their physical or their mental or their social well-being. And so getting to the heart of that is an individual thing. There's not a blanket solution to homelessness. There are individual solutions, and there's broad categories, and there's a lot that can be applied effectively and known. But each person is different. And really, you shouldn't be enabled. It's not compassionate to enable someone to continue doing drugs, destroying themselves, destroying their family. So, we need policies to reflect that truth. And it sounds like this gentleman you're talking about who, was canceled in, did you say Los Angeles? Because his ideas weren't acceptable to what I will call the current status quo. That is changing dramatically under President Trump, who came in with the idea that really this is an addiction and mental illness issue for a large majority of the people who you see on the streets. Either they're suffering from untreated mental illness, and that's a whole problem in itself that we created as a society with other policies. Maybe some were meant for good, but the results have been painful and destructive. Or they're suffering from addiction. And I'm told from people who've sort of watched the drug market over the years, it used to be meth and heroin and cocaine. Over and over, I hear from people that fentanyl is a completely different beast. That people who could have succeeded at getting off of meth or off of cocaine because they one day just said enough of this. Fentanyl, it's like anyway, I hardly know how to describe it, but people are like, this is not the same thing. People are never going to choose to get off of fentanyl.
Well, I think we've all seen the videos of the people just flopped over.
It's
with
awful.
Their
Very
knuckles
zombie-like.
dragging on the sidewalk. That's
Yeah.
none of us have ever seen that before. Fentanyl.
No, it's terrible. And you mentioned that people want their drug, right? Really, really, people I don't think realize that you're basically choosing between kinds of suffering. So, life has a lot of suffering in it. And as a Christian, I don't believe it was designed to be that way. I believe that came in when with the fall of man, right? But now there's suffering. And we just talked about sometimes it's suffering to get up and go to work, because you don't feel like it. But you choose that suffering over because it brings you something that you want more than. And also you're avoiding a different kind of suffering that's worse, right? You're avoiding not being able to pay for your family, and all those things. And so when someone is choosing their addiction, a lot of times they're showing no self-denial of any kind, right? And it takes self-denial to get through life and succeed. And so so people, I guess maybe what I'll wrap that thought up with is that compassion is a Latin word. It's two words put together, cum and passion, with suffering. It's literally what it means. Compassion is to suffer with other people toward a good. And so it is not compassion to make someone comfortable with their drugs in an isolated room in a motel. It is compassion to say it's going to be really hard to overcome this addiction. It's going to be painful. There's going to be withdrawals. There's going to be like 2 or 3 years just to get your mind to work properly, to see life with reality. But we're going to walk with you through that. That's compassion. And so there is no way forward without suffering, and if people can understand that, then they can see that really what I'm doing is choosing my suffering. Do I want to suffer because I'm in a fentanyl fold on the street with my, with injuries that are actually killing me, or do I want to suffer the pain of denying myself, learning new habits, because that's the choice, really. And some people sadly will choose the worst suffering, but many people with help can overcome that. They can become a different person, a transformed person, that they can reach their potential, become self-sufficient. And that's the goal. That should be the goal of any policy that we promote for homelessness.
There's been a lot of talk in the media about fraud,
Hmm.
welfare fraud, education fraud, Medicaid fraud. Um, I know in Washington State there was just a brief. I mean, it was just a brief blip on the radar because, interestingly enough, as soon as all of these fraud allegations came out, the rioting in Minneapolis kicked off. You know, just completely out of control. But it was DCYF, Washington DCYF, that was being, which is the Department of Child and Youth. Uh, I don't know what the I can't remember what the F stands for. To the tune of some, I think it was like maybe like 70 some odd $1 million. I researched Medicaid spending on homeless healthcare. It's almost twice what a non-homeless person costs the system. Can homeless individuals, what sort of benefits can homeless individuals collect without an address, and are they allowed to use public buildings as addresses to take advantage of benefits that might be denied to? Because I remember when I was growing up and I got out of the house early because I wanted to get on my own feet and I wanted to have my own freedom. So I touched on, I knew homeless people. And one of the things I remember coming up is, oh, I can't get this if I don't have an address. And I never let anyone use my address to take advantage of those benefits, but I know others who did. Is that still a barrier to entry into these welfare programs for homeless people?
That's a great question, and I don't think I know the answer to that right now. And so maybe that's something I just haven't been around long enough in that research. So I will look into that.
I'll ask Grok right
Because
now.
Okay, it has all the answers. I think when you're on the street, that's a different kind of homelessness. And so often they get handouts. People will walk up and give them meals and things like that. That's a totally different kind of benefit than a treatment program. Some of them, are offered permanent housing, so that's a pretty expensive benefit, but they would have a house. So I'm trying to pull pieces from my mind that I've looked at on this issue. I do know that one of the gentlemen who works with Discovery Institute now, Kevin Dahlgren, who has a Substack account out of Portland. He goes and talks to homeless people all the time, so he's well known down in Portland, and he has found that some of them have multiple apartments. Sometimes they even sublet an apartment that they receive as a permanent housing benefit. So they like to, they will actually choose to live in
Clever.
their tent, yeah, and then rent out some apartments. So there's that you would call that organized crime, right? It's organized theft. So I think it would be well worth investigating further into all of that. Where does the money go? I can tell you right now, money wise in the system, a big portion of it goes to the people who run the nonprofits.
I have the
So
answer from
just,
Grok here, if
oh,
you're
good.
curious.
What's it say?
The answer, and of course, grain of salt, because we can't always rely on AI to give us the most accurate answer. Most U.S. welfare benefits require at least a mailing address for enrollment and correspondence, but not necessarily a permanent residential address. Homeless individuals can often use a shelter, friend's address, post office
Hmm.
general delivery, or agency office. Examples include SNAP, food benefits, needs a mailing address, state residency verified, but flexible for homeless. Of course, Medicaid, we talked about. Medicaid, TANF, cash assistance, state residency required, mailing address often used, Social Security, mailing address, or direct deposit, no fixed home needed. So I would
Wow.
guess
Wow.
in blue cities and blue states, the address or residence requirement is probably a little bit flexible. I know on the topic of illegal immigration, a lot of NGOs were letting illegal immigrants use their address so that they could take advantage of those benefits. I don't see why I mean, I would imagine that even more compassion exists from these organizations to homeless individuals. And that just
Yeah.
kind of, to me, that brings up the topic of, compassion. What you were talking
Yeah.
about, cruelty. I don't want. I mean, I want everybody to have everything that they want all the time.
Mhm.
Of course, that's not really healthy for people, as we've discussed. But what would something like mandatory drug testing do to the homeless population in terms of what kind of benefits they're allowed to collect? I mean, I'm sure it's not a very popular idea, but it must have been raised probably several times in these discussions.
Right. It's a very fair question when you think about who is paying the bills, right? So, someone like you who gets up, goes to work faithfully to make sure that you can pay your own bills, make sure your house is paid for, your kids have food and clothes, all of that, and yet a portion of your work day goes to benefits, right? And we call it compassion, but it goes to benefits. And if those can be used to purchase drugs, essentially you are being forced through your taxes to support someone else's drug habit. And that to me is offensive in the extreme, right? And so you have, when they're getting an EBT card or there's lots of workarounds for, let's say those funds are restricted for certain purchases, but we all know that people find lots of ways around that to cash them out or whatever. And the problem, what's terrible is that you have these facilities, a permanent housing facility, where people are living inside there. They get their monthly stipend, that they get for their welfare check or whatever. And that's about when all the drug dealers show up. This is patterns that have been observed by people who document it and journalists and things. So once a month, all the drug dealers show up and the people hand over their EBT cards or whatever to the drug dealers and they get their drugs and they're allowed to do those in their taxpayer subsidized housing facility. Nobody's stopping them from doing drugs. So basically we are warehousing people while they die a slow death. I mean, it's like a really perverse kind of hospice program that we're running with public dollars. And it's just something I think we should all think of as unacceptable. I don't think it's offensive to say we're willing to help you. We're willing to get you through treatment. We're willing to walk with you for 2 years. A lot of these, like Union Gospel Mission, those programs are 2 years long, and they will full-time staff walk with you to help you get past all of this. Frequently, they're teaching people even just basic things like right and wrong, basic things like your childhood and your growing up was not right. What happened to you was not right. Teaching them
Take
basic
me through the
nutrition.
program. What does Union Gospel Mission do in terms of housing? A family like you talked about in your op-ed. How do they make it work? How do they keep
Yeah, and
track?
I don't know that they have a full family. I'm not sure actually that there's a facility for families. They have a women and children's, I know, in Spokane. So moms and their kids, and then they have a men's and multiple locations for both of those. I should find out if there's a group that does family rehab. I know that the Indian tribe on the West Coast, Quinault or something like that, they do have a family drug treatment program where the whole family can go and live there while a member goes through treatment. So I think that's a wonderful idea. But Union Gospel Mission, so I had a really neat talk with a man named James, who is now 7 years clean and sober. He was from Northeast Washington here. He grew up into a drug dealing family. That was from the time he was little. That was the family business. He doesn't remember ever having any parental boundaries. Actually, his dad skipped out when he was an infant. His mom raised him and his siblings. He never as a kid worried, oh, I'm going to make mom and dad mad or, I'm going to get in trouble, except where it was with the drug dealing, right? So there were boundaries around that you didn't mess with. That's where the fear in their family came from. Where for other kids, it's like, oh, I'm going to get caught doing this thing I shouldn't do. So he did not grow up having parents who taught him basic right from wrong. I don't think it even occurred to him until well into adulthood that his dad actually abandoned him, because a father who's absent can kind of get away with being neutral, he never did any harm kind of a thing. So when he was about 45, he was living on the street in Spokane, basically got cold and hungry. And at the time, it was still illegal in Washington state to do, to be publicly camping somewhere. And those laws were part of what nudged him toward change. He was a multi-time felon. In fact, I would call prison part of his family compound for the first 40 years of his life. He spent 10 or 12 years of his life in prison at various times. And it wasn't a bad gig for him. Like, he didn't mind going to prison. It was kind of a time to cool off, get a break from the stresses of life. He'd see cousins there, it was like part of their circle. But at the time, Washington had mandatory sentencing laws, and so he was now like an 8-point felon. And at that point, if you get one more felony, you're put away for a long time, mandatory. And so that was a factor in his decision making, because they also understand conditions. Everyone does, there's conditions on the street, just like we can't make a conditionless life for anybody. Anyway, so he got cold and hungry on the streets of Spokane and walked through the door of the Union Gospel Mission. And he was annoyed by the fact that Union Gospel Mission requires that you attend a chapel service in exchange for your hot meal. But it's good food. He was like, well, it's good food, and it was only a short service, so it was worth the exchange. And someone speaking that night was a father talking about his son who was heading off to the military. And for James, this friend who I was talking to, it was the first time he'd ever encountered a father who showed some concern and love for his son. So it just really stuck in his head. It was just that was sort of outlandish for him. So he was back on the streets for a couple months before he actually walked back into Union Gospel Mission and went through their 2-year program. And now he works for Union Gospel Mission, and he's just a completely different person. And so the laws helped someone like James. We've since removed a lot of those laws. Drug possession, use of illicit, dangerous drugs is, we don't enforce a lot of that now. We don't enforce public camping laws. So all those things that give people right conditions are being removed from these people's lives, which is not a help to them at all. I think it's a hindrance to them becoming who they can be, So I think, did that answer your question?
Where do you think this rampant compassion has come from in our culture?
Well, I think there's probably different camps. I always wonder myself, like, who's the true believers behind this? Because it doesn't seem like a good idea, and it seems obviously like a bad idea. So
well,
there are
like
people.
Anybody with common sense would go, oh, I'm enabling this person to continue destroying their life. And that's what sends me on this thought path of, wait a minute, are we willingly letting these people die because then they just don't become a problem? Are we willingly sending them to places like Colville because then they will become Colville's problem, and Colville now has to develop homeless shelters for these people because they're allowed to camp on the streets if they don't have any kind of shelters or facilities for them? Like, I have a hard time seeing how bad and pervasive the problem has become, and think, oh, well, this is just an accident. Because on one hand, I will admit, it feels really good to be generous. Like, I go to rural resources almost every day for my job, and I see the girls in there very excited and happy to help the people that are in there.
Mm-hmm.
Then the other day, as I was walking out, I saw a guy standing in there with no shoes on, the brand new socks, it seems to be, but no shoes on, talking to the girls about how he didn't have any shoes. I walk out into the parking lot and see this gentleman has taken his shoes off in the parking lot so that he could walk into rural resources and say, help, I don't have any shoes.
Wow.
So these
A miniature
girls,
scam.
Obviously, yeah, they're really excited about helping people. And I hurt myself at work, and I had to deal with a few different organizations for workers' comp and things like that. And one of the girls I talked to was so excited to get me through to the end of this, application process so that she could start sending me my benefits. It was like, I felt wonderful. She felt wonderful. It's all great feelings. Telling somebody, no, you have to take a drug test if you want to get these food stamps. You have to take a drug test if you want to live in this warm place. You have to sit through a church service if you want this warm meal. That doesn't feel good. But in your opinion, is there also an insidious motivation behind the removal of these regulations and sort of the disincentive to prosecute offenders for, camping on the streets?
It sure seems like there would have to be, unless there's just a really simplistic thinking. And in both cases, it's harmful. So money is a huge motivator. And I think that that's a serious problem. The second thing is I think people have, well, it depends on how you view human nature. So I don't know if you've ever read any Charles Dickens novels, Victor Hugo, Les Mis, you probably know the story, right?
I'm aware of them, but haven't read them myself.
Yeah. So Oliver Twist, right? He's this little orphan boy, and the little match girl. There's all these great classic literature that show poverty, where there's just a deserving soul who is suffering. And I think we might imagine that that's everyone on the street now, is that they are just waiting for someone to come and offer them a warm place, and they're going to grow up and become their best self. And that's probably true of some people on, somewhere out there. But human nature, and again, I come to this. So if you believe that humans are by their very nature good, then it would be true that if you just give them a good environment, then they're going to bloom into something better, like a plant, where all they need is right conditions to thrive. If you believe in the Christian tradition, human nature isn't necessarily always good. We have to fight ourselves, right? We can be our own worst enemy because our desires are misaligned with what is actually good for us a lot of the time. So if you understand that, and any parent does, if you have children, you know that they're not, you have made great conditions for them, and they're still sometimes going to choose to do the wrong thing, to disobey, to fight with each other, whatever. So we have to be truthful about that in our policy making as well. And I think, I just think it's right and good to expect people to rise to a better standard, and then be helped towards something good, not just to keep them comfortable wherever they might want to do whenever. So that's something where I think, and they can find real transformation. James, who I was talking with, is a different person. He is now contributing to society where he once was harming society with his criminal behavior, all of that. Now he's actually out there doing good for the people around him. And what a lot of people don't talk about now is that is actually a mandate of Congress in our homeless legislation. So we talk a lot about harm reduction. That's where you're actually handing out drug paraphernalia. My understanding, word of mouth, is that sometimes they're actually handing out drugs. Like outreach workers will hand out drugs to drug addicts on the street in the name of, hey, this will keep them from having a withdrawal, or, we'll keep them from something worse than the drug, like as if the drug is not actually killing them, So in the name of harm reduction. But in the legislation that currently drives homeless policy, it has been largely ignored that one of the principles of Congress's legislation is that we optimize self-sufficiency in recipients of these programs. They're meant to be temporary. They're meant to get you back on your feet. And the truth is, we forget where this money comes from. We think, and I'm sad to say it, but I think a lot of people actually do believe that government has its own money, as if it doesn't have to get every single dollar it spends out of the pocket of a working person. Like that is the only way to get money, is from someone who produces it. Government, of course, prints money, and that is a form of theft down the road with inflation and all of that. But so we need to be just in that. If I'm going to take money out of Joe's pocket after he works, how am I going to spend that? And I think we can all agree that handing it to someone who has no intention of working, no intention of trying to better themselves, is just going to suck it in and use it for their own pleasure. I think we can agree that that's not good for anybody. in fact, that's bad for everybody, you know? So if that's the basis of policy, that's not going to work.
I want to play this video for you because neither of us is homeless. We've had contact, of course, with the homeless, but I in doing my prep for this interview, I found this video and I wanted to share it with you and sort of get your thoughts.
Everything you read in the paper that says all these shelters are so wonderful, not. You have to check them out yourself and you'll see quite different. You know, you go to regular shelters and there's people that stay awake all night fighting. All they want to talk about is drugs. All they do is steal from people that are asleep. And so nobody wants to sleep in these shelters. But then everyone's always saying, you should be in a shelter. Bad on you for not doing that. Well, you can't. It's not a good place for a lot of people. The navigation centers, there's a lot of hope there, or used to be. And now it's just so much red tape in there. You get in there for a week and they kick you right back out. They're not helping anything. Everything you read in the paper.
The concept of being, I mean, to me, the concept here is disincentivizing people to go to the shelter, to be in the shelter, to do the thing. It's, I mean, I imagine it's like chickens in cages all piled on top of each other, horrible conditions, because the farmer, the administrator in this case, it just wants to do the bare minimum. I feel like laziness is a big part of the problem on behalf of, you know, in part from the homeless individual and also from the administrators, the people that are responsible for providing these services. It's hard to say no. It's way easier to say yes. It's hard to force these people to get the treatment that they want, that they need. And then on the other side, it's hard to tell myself, no, I have to stop doing drugs or I'm going to lose my warm place to sleep. But then the warm place that I have to sleep is populated with a bunch of losers just like me.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not calling them the losers. I'm saying this is the thought process.
Yeah.
They're just waiting for me to fall asleep so that they can steal all of my stuff. I mean, how would you respond to this guy saying, I can't go to that shelter, it's a cesspit?
Yeah, he's exactly right. And the problem is no barrier, low barrier shelters. This is a policy mandate that says you cannot have a standard walking through that door that someone in this shelter has to be sober. So this is actually actively pushed by our current government policy, actually not President Trump's, because he's trying to reverse this, but he's being sued to prevent him from changing that. Again, it's this warped idea that compassion is making sure that nobody has to do a hard thing. And so when you have a shelter where you're not going to keep people from using drugs, you're not going to enforce, you know, and I think they try maybe to enforce, but when there's not enforcement of basic human rights laws, basic public safety laws, you know, so I am for, let me just say this. I think that we need emergency shelters that let anybody in off the street because they need to get out of the weather, you know, or it might be dangerous. So come inside, but you're gonna, so there is that role for that, just no barrier, you walk in, but there's gonna be strict enforcement of no violence. You're gonna have law and order in that place, right? And then you're gonna get clean before you move out of that place into anything, you know, so a transitional housing is gonna be treatment based. We're going to expect you to improve and recover. We're going to give you the support you need to do that, but there are going to be rules to be here. And you can hear that resentment of rules in some people. The Union Gospel Mission, people criticize them for being, so rules based. They have very few rules, but they're really important rules, right? You're not going to come in there on drugs. So you've got to get clean before you come in there. You got to get sober. But you know, in the case of my friend James, he had drugs in his system when he crawled in there from his tent where he was cold and had pneumonia. And so Union Gospel Mission works with him and they said, look, you can't sleep here when you've got drugs in your system, but we're going to arrange for you to go to a nearby night shelter where those drugs can work their way out of your system and it'll be okay for you to be there. And then as soon as we get a clean drug test, you're coming into our program and we're going to walk with you for 2 years. full-time, pour into you. I mean, really, essentially what they do is raise a lot of people who never got raised by good parents. I mean, it's really amazing what they accomplish there. So there is a place. I'm not for like, hey, go clean yourself up and then we'll talk to you when you're a pleasant person. Jesus welcomes people just as they are, right? You come in and you are a mess. So that's okay. There's a place for that, but it is meant to very quickly get you out of that mess, to start moving you toward a better life that is better for you. And hopefully someday, not everyone is capable of self-sufficiency, and that's okay. Some people are going to need lifelong support, lifelong care because they have severe disability, and there's a big difference between a disability, which is uncurable, and a disease, which by definition is treatable, is curable sometimes, so addiction is not a disability, it's a disease, it's it's in that class. So I'd say people have a lot of responsibility for their own choices, but addiction is treatable. And so people, if they have a chance to come out of that, that's what we should be working toward. Like 100% all the time for each individual, we should be working to get them healed from these injuries, these traumas, these bad habits, these bad addictions, and so the whole system needs to be structured to handle and to accomplish that. And it can, so when we have this systemic problem of drug use inside of housing, subsidized housing, dealers who actually deal inside the housing, that's just it's a failure of policy, but it's a failure of something else too, and if you talk to people who've been in those state systems, they will tell you it's like these are like networking places, the rehab centers for the state where you have no rules, you can come in high. Essentially, it's like a big networking conference for people who want drugs, people who want to sell drugs. I had one gentleman at one of the public hearings here in Stevens County he's recovering now, and he's a different person, but he said, man, I can tell you, if you open up a place like that in your small town, it's like opening a portal to every bad thing. And he said, those of us who are in that world, we know how to spot vulnerable teens, and we will target them because they're our next customer. It's just human nature is not always good. And so the law is there to make it hard to be bad. The law is there to protect the innocent, to make a safe place for good things to thrive. And so when we pervert the law and use it instead to take money from working people and support people who don't want to work or have not decided to overcome their addictions, it's very much a perversion of everything that is, the way it's designed.
Well, and the road to recovery, for people that don't know, it's intense.
Yeah.
My friend that I was talking about earlier in the show, he was that was how he got out of it. He got fully engrossed in the 12-step program, and he is, I mean, last I heard, it's sad because he doesn't talk to me anymore, because I am sort of a reminder of his old life. And that's one of the, I mean, I don't know if it's a plank to recovery in the system, in the program, but they don't want people in the program dating. You have to move away. You can't have any contact with your old friends, all these kind of sort of intense requirements that really, in my opinion, do benefit your ability to make a full recovery. I mean, it's one of the reasons I think why the Union Gospel Mission program is 2 years long, because they say for things like heroin recovery, you got to be in it for at least a year. And even after a year of, what they call working the program, you can still revert back to your old ways. You run into somebody on the street because you didn't leave town, and he's still using or he's still selling drugs, and suddenly you're back in the thick of your addiction. And this makes me wonder how the treatment for these families, for this 9-year-old boy and his parents, would work, because that's a massive obstacle for those parents who have been using together for years and have their whole lives, I would imagine, built around the goal of getting drugs so they can use and being high together. And oh, remember when we used to be high together and that was so beautiful and we look back on it so fondly. It's a massive challenge. And my idea was, what about something like Job Corps, where you have your own little trailer, but you're on a compound where you can't come and go freely. You have to get up in the morning. What do you think about something like that for, I mean, if not integrating it into the already existing Job Corps infrastructure, something set up similarly where they could live for 2 years as a family unit, live the dream essentially, and learn this is how a normal family functions. You have school facilities there for the 9-year-old, maybe even some trade programs, a shop class, a woodworking class where we can learn how to change the oil in our cars and learn how to use hand tools. What would something, what would that be cost prohibitive, or is that, could that be a realistic solution for some of these special cases where we don't want to tear up the family, but we have to solve this problem?
Right. It seems like it to me. And I think there's a lot of questions that would have to be answered, right? But we're spending all of that money already in piecemeal, right? We have law and order, we have courts, we have jails, we have prisons, we have rehab centers, we have civil commitment institutions, you know. So yes, it does cost money, and that has to be addressed. The other piece of that would really just have to be very carefully addressed is accountability inside these institutions, because many people do encounter abuse. You know, you mentioned the shelter and brought up that that gentleman who said, you know, they don't want to be in the shelter. And my dad had worked for years as a registered nurse in psychiatric facilities and with homeless people in one capacity or another. And that is a real concern is, you know, I'm not going to that place. It's dangerous. You know, it's a dangerous place, this institution that society has put a stamp of approval on. So that has to be looked at, because even, you know, two things that we haven't addressed are childhood trauma, which, you know, so you have someone who's homeless on the street now as an adult, and we might look at them and go, we tend to have these two errors, I would say. One is, you know, assuming that everyone is means well all the time, and the other is assuming that they deserve what they get. They made their choices, you know, whatever. And I think frequently neither of those is the truth. And there are a lot of kids who have just been traumatized in their childhood, right? So they just never had a chance, kind of a thing. And so now they're living on the streets, but if you hear their backstory, you know, it's just horrific. So we need to look at that carefully and figure out, what are we going to do for the teenagers, the kids who are out there. And then the other is mental illness, you know, because many of the people on the street are not criminally minded. Some of them are not addicts, but they have untreated mental illness. And so they're really vulnerable. They can be dangerous because of their delusions, you know, so there's it's very complicated. And if you look at the history of policy, we deinstitutionalized, right, because of known abuses inside of mental institutions. But we did it in a way that I think resulted in basically now our asylums are the streets. You know, that's where the mentally ill people are. And what they need is compassionate care. A lot of times I think we need to consider how to use civil commitment laws in a reasonable way to help people who are in danger on the streets, because they can't think, they can't help themselves. And if you've ever walked in downtown Spokane, you've encountered people or seen them on the road, and you know they're not in their right mind. You know, they're very, very vulnerable to anyone who might take advantage of them. They can't help themselves. So we need to answer questions like that too. But I think what you're describing is probably what we should look at. You know, how do we have some kind of facility that gives people as much autonomy as they can, but a really structured environment? If nothing else, you know, I mean, you can't force someone's heart to change. So if you have two parents who are just like waiting to get out so they can get right back to it, you know, at least their kid got 2 years, you know, of stable life, right? So And I think it needs to be explored, the rights that children have. If we think of our right to life, to liberty, to the pursuit of and the enjoyment of our own property, what rights do children have naturally? I'll call it a God-given right. When you're born into to your parents, do you have some rights? Do they have a duty to you that is yours by right? And I think that's a fair question. We tend to treat it like it's only the thinking person has the right. If they're old enough to desire to be free of their child, or then their rights matter more. And I don't think that's true. So how, as a society, do we protect the rights of children, even when it means that that parents find themselves, a little more forced into meeting their duties, because there are plenty of laws where if you're derelict in your duty, you're subject to the law. If you take a job as a policeman and then you don't do your job when you're required, and you're on the clock, if you're a politician and you don't do what you've been hired or elected by the people to do, that's a breach of contract, that the law does step in and enforce. So all of those, there's kind of vague concepts right now, but all of that would play in somehow to what would be the right thing to do, the just thing to do for a family like that.
Yeah, I think one of the big obstacles is the give and take, the back and forth, the yin and yang. Like we talked about at the beginning of the show, the suffering that you endure for the later payoff, the later benefits. I used to tell my friends when we worked at the lumber mill together. It's like, putting work boots on makes you really appreciate taking those work boots off at the end of the day. When you're living your life on the streets and everything just sucks all the time, you don't have that moment of sort of pleasure in the fruits of your labor, and having a way to show people in a safe, controlled environment, hey, you worked your shift. The fruits of your labor are now, go put your flip-flops on, go put on your sweatpants, and come eat a warm meal, because you've earned that. You've earned that now. Making that like, hey, instead of standing on the off-ramp for 12 hours, now I can go buy myself a little piece of something to smoke in my alleyway. That's not the payoff that we want. But this is it's like the same it's the same scenario. It's the same system. Rewards and sacrifice. But this is, look at your happy wife. Look at your happy child, like putting things in perspective for these people. It seems like what they really like. Don't you like this? You've done this for a year now. Like, isn't this pretty good? The alarm gets off. The alarm goes off. You wake up in your warm bed. You have breakfast. You go to your job. Hopefully something that you enjoy doing, because I know that was a big struggle for me entering the workforce. When I'm around my peers that aren't working, that are sitting around doing drugs, using welfare, food stamps to do their thing, it's hard to force yourself. I'm just saying, this is my understanding and why these people don't want to be in the system, sort of coming back to the greedy corporations that we were talking about earlier. Why do I want to live in this system where I just go, the sweat of my brow is capitalized upon by this greedy corporation that just wants to serve the shareholders? I don't want to be a part of that. It sucks. I don't, it's so thankless. It's so not rewarding. I saw a video the other day, a couple days ago, where a waitress showed her check that she worked 70 hours to earn a $9 paycheck, because she only gets paid $2 and something an hour because she's a waitress. She's supposed to work for tips. So after 70 hours and payroll taxes, her check is $9. Like, I think now we've opened a whole can of worms about the life of the working individual in 2026 corporate America. But your latest project is the Mingo Mountain Foundation. Tell us a little bit about that, and tell us how we can get involved in our own
Sure.
neighborhoods, because you talked about people walking down the streets shouting at the air. I see those people now in my town, and I find it very alarming. I have 2 little girls. I would like for them to be able to ride their bikes on the sidewalk in front of my house. But already now in Colville, small town with a population of 5,000-6,000 people, now I have lunatics. Pardon. I mean, I do have compassion for these people, but I have lunatics walking the sidewalks in my town now. What can I do? What can we do in our own town to help this situation?
Right. Well, and I'll get right to that. Just to wrap up the other idea, work is dignity, and that's just reality. It's not dignified to not work, right? Work is a gift. So if people can come to appreciate and understand that. The other thing I think we need to look at really carefully is, do people have a right to welfare and charity? And I would say you don't have a right to that. I feel as a Christian, I have a duty to extend that. But there's a big difference between an entitlement and something you receive with gratitude in a time of need. And that the whole culture would change if we thought about that differently. So when you talk about this waitress, there's 2 big players, I think, in that. Maybe the corporate greed, but also you mentioned payroll taxes. So there's something called, a public treasury greed too, that really affects how people can enjoy what they've earned. So you mentioned your little girls. There is this principle called quiet enjoyment of what you own in your community, and that is violated when someone else is free to come in and destroy that environment, right? So again, we're told you're not being compassionate. There's this little NIMBYism that you'll be accused of, right? If you try to change your society and your community and say, hey, we don't want to allow this. Oh, you're a NIMBY, not in my backyard. You just don't care about people, and you just want someone else to deal with that problem. I think that's really unfair and offensive for people to say that, because you do have the right and, in fact, the duty to protect your community, to protect your family. And so you should not feel guilted into allowing danger into their lives in the name of compassion, because compassion for who? Like, that's not compassion for your family, your little girls. And so there has to be community harm reduction, if you want to flip that on its head, right? We want to reduce harm to the community by not allowing criminal behavior, by not allowing bad actors to just run rampant. There is something that, people should be limited, and they should be stopped when they're trying to behave in evil ways. So what do you do? I hope to have a better answer to that soon, but obviously it makes a difference when people get involved in their local government. In Colville, just recently, there was, probably for the last year and a half, there have been a series of hearings where citizens were encouraging city council members and those who are deciding on ordinances, encouraging them to push back against the state, which has an active plan right now that they are working out, that was put in effect under Governor Inslee, where they're planning to empty the psychiatric hospitals. They're planning to empty McNeil Island, where there's dangerous sex offenders who have served a prison sentence for violent crimes. They're considered by a whole panel of experts to be still dangerous, high risk for reoffense. And so they're in civil commitment. They're not sentenced there as part of their prison term, but they're like too dangerous to let them out. So they're committed there. Those people are being sent into communities all over Washington state by design right now. And all of it is in the RCWs. It's all been passed into legislation in the last few years. I would just encourage citizens to show up at their council meetings and say, hey, we don't have to accept that. It seems really absurd for a community of thinking people to have to accept harmful legislation that violates their human rights, violates their community and the safety of their community. So that's what the Constitution is for. It's like to say, hey, no, that's the supreme law and you are violating that. So we have grounds to lawfully challenge what your plans are. And so just having that understanding, city councils have a lot of authority that frequently is not exercised because it's scary. The state will threaten them, and so you hear a lot about liability from the state. The state's going to come in and probably remove funding because they will, right? If you don't do what they want, they'll punish you maybe by not giving you grants. And so there's a certain level of where people just need some guts. Local officials need to stand up and say, our job is actually to be a bulwark for our people who we represent. And so we're here because we have a role in fending off bad policy, adopting good policy, affirming what is right, opposing what is bad. And there's not a great amount of that sometimes that goes on. So I would encourage citizens to understand those things, to get involved in the local process, to understand state laws. And it feels like it's just an uphill battle sometimes when the legislature just pushes out hundreds of bills every session and you hardly even know what any of them are about. But I think here's a question. Did you ever read the poet Shel Silverstein? He writes
a bit like the stuff that they show to kids.
Yeah, exactly. He's a children's poet.
Where
right?
the
And
sidewalk ends, right? Was that him?
Yes. And there's a poem in there called Sarah Cynthia Sylvia Stout, who would not take the garbage out. And pretty soon the garbage piles up and her house explodes. And it's a great, hilarious. But there's just truth to the idea that citizenship requires maintenance. And so when we let it pile up until it's exploding the roof, it feels overwhelming, right? There's so many bad laws going through Olympia right now, and it just feels like there's nothing we can do. Well, probably that was because we didn't do it the first 15 times, right? So there's just an amount of being aware of getting involved where you can, and hopefully getting to a point where that's maintenance instead of catastrophe that you're trying to clean up. So, citizens, it's just our government is based on self-government, right? It's of the people. And if the people stop getting involved or start to think that the government is something separate and different other than just members of their community and their neighbors who happen to be in positions of borrowed authority for a purpose, then it can get out of hand. People can really abuse the power that is lent to them. So there's really no replacement for citizens understanding the process, understanding their rights and the consequences of policy, and being involved. Even though it's not very fun a lot of the time. Government should be boring, and too much of the time it's not boring.
Well, and it seemed, one thing says, I did go to one of those hearings that you were referring when it talks about, sort of inviting the dregs of society, to put it bluntly. That's kind of my thing.
It feels like that, right?
I try not to mince words, and they come out much easier when I'm not worried about hurting people's feelings. And then I think I heard our mutual friends, Bill, told me about the next hearing that was happening on this topic that was going to be at 10 o'clock in the morning on Thursday or something like that. Like that seems like a pretty willful exclusion of at least the working public who can go to a city council meeting happening at 10 o'clock on a Thursday. That's it's another of their weaselly little ways that they work around the will of the public. And frankly, I feel like the concept of closing down these care facilities to push the people out into small towns to just get rid of the overhead. Oh, we don't have that facility to worry about anymore. And don't worry, we sent those undesirable people into someone else's township, and now it's their problem to deal with. So we can pat ourselves on the back. We can tell our local constituents that we took care of this problem, and oh, look how the crime rates are down, like we're doing such a great job, while they skyrocket in other areas. Like, do you have any advice for the people that want to get involved, get more heavily involved? Does it Is it just standing down at the South Roundabout with signs on the weekends? I mean, of course, that's one thing that we could do that would probably be pretty effective. But what would you say to
Yeah.
the average working Joe? Like where to start on
Yeah.
getting involved?
Well, I'll tell you a dream I have for the Mingo Mountain Foundation. And I want to say this with my hands wide open because I do have a board. And so they're going to, of course, be giving counsel, and we'll make these decisions together. But one of my goals is actually to develop a journalism club where we can train teenagers. There's a lot of smart teenagers in Stevens County who are aware of what's going on, can be trained to do investigative journalism. There's a lot of wonderful retired citizens in Stevens County who are interested, intelligent. So I would love to develop a team of citizen journalists who can attend. Maybe there's just one particular issue that happens to be near and dear to their heart. So that person might want to attend some of the meetings that deal with that issue and help the rest of us understand them, keep us informed, give us the action items, because no one person can possibly keep up. We've got multiple issues that we're dealing with that feel forced on us, like the wolf management of Northeast Washington and the EPA, wanting to declare part of Stevens County a hazard site, and all these things. And you start to feel like you get divided, right? There's a meeting in Ellensburg tomorrow about the wolf management. There's a meeting in Northport. No one person can really even keep up. So I think if we develop a team of people who can look at local issues, so maybe right now you're busy working, and so you might want to donate to that so that we can afford to pay the expenses of getting it, getting the newspaper printed or whatever, and then receive that information with. What I hope to do is give like scalable activities. If you're just crazy busy at this season, you've got little kids, you're working full time. Here's some things that someone can do in 5 minutes that will make a difference. If you've got a little more time, here's something you can do that you can invest a little bit more time in, because we're all at different places. I know there have been times, even though I've always been interested in policy and I've always followed it closely. There were a few times where I'm like calling a trusted friend and saying, who should I vote for? I've had no time to dig into this election. I trust you. I know your philosophy on all these things. Help me out. So there's not shame in not being at that season of life where you can just dig into every issue. But I think we could build a very effective team of people who could help the whole community understand issues, know how to get involved, know what would actually matter, because I'm not always sure. It does matter when people show up, but I took a bunch of teenagers out to Olympia last spring for the PAGE program, legislative pages. So I was out there for a week chatting with people in the Capitol, and every single day there were 2 or 3 protests on the Olympia Capitol steps, and it was business as usual for everyone inside the Capitol. They would instruct the pages, oh yeah, there will be a crowd out there, just skirt around them, make sure you don't show up in any pictures. I don't know, we feel like we just made a huge investment in the world when we travel over to Olympia and shout on the steps. For the people in Olympia, I don't know if they even notice. It's just so much par for the course over there. So wisely looking at what really does make a difference, I would like to know that as a citizen, and I think that can be uncovered and understood. So that's one of my goals for the Mingo Mountain Foundation, is just to provide that kind of in-depth, investigative, informative information for citizens that can be used by normal people.
What kind of people are you looking for right now to develop this? We have your website pulled up here. The contact information here is an email address, info@mingomountainfoundation.com.
Yeah.
What sort of positions do you have to be filled? What sort of expertise are you looking for to help this grow?
Yeah, well, I'm a big believer that you can develop expertise just by being interested and practicing. So
Me too.
I'm
self-taught at pretty much everything.
Yeah, anybody who is interested in, so you heard me describe what it might look like to have a citizen journalism club. So that would be anybody who likes to write, maybe even photographers, even people who know how to take notes or would like to learn, right? Because they could go to a meeting and take notes. Even if they're very afraid of writing, they could provide notes to someone who knows how to write that up. So I'd say if there are folks out there who have an interest in just being part of a team like that, it's not fully developed what those pieces are, but we will be figuring that out. And if I knew that you were interested, I would be happy to have your name and number and communicate about it as soon as we have more specific plans. But you know, writing letters to people, all those things. There's just a lot that a citizen can do, and it's fun to do something that matters with other people who care. So even just, you know, being part of a community that has intent to be involved and be informed, that's a delight for people who really do want to be part of what I'll call maintenance, because you know, I think we all change the world in some way just by being who we are. But when it comes to government and public policy issues, we really do just have to a lot of times maintain, because people have a tendency to use the power of government to benefit themselves. It's just a human tendency. It's not like, you know, mastermind kind of evil. It's just natural tendency, and we all have to kind of guard against that. So yeah, so I think anyone who's interested or just wants to know more about it once we have things more developed, they are welcome to email me at that email address.
And that was, one more time, info@mingomountainfoundation.com. Marsha, as I bring the outro music in here, tell us if there is anywhere else you would like us to go to contact you or experience your work and or get involved.
Sure. Well, I'll give the Discovery Institute address, which is just discovery.org. And that's a Seattle-based national think tank, but they put out excellent work in multiple areas of study. So discovery.org, that's the Discovery Institute, and they're well worth looking at.
And do you have
Thank
a
you very
Facebook
much,
or
Ryan.
anything else if somebody wants to contact you directly?
Yeah, I do actually have Facebook. I just have never used it very much, but I started to recently. So I have just Marsha Michaelis on Facebook, and then I have an X account, and I'm learning how to use that, but it's very fledgling. And I think my handle might just be @Marsha Michaelis.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. Great time, good conversation.
Thank you,
I
Ryan.
look
It was
forward
a
to-
pleasure.
Yes, same. I look forward to speaking with you again. And hey, everybody, let's get to work. All right, we got it. Nobody's coming to save us. We're gonna have to. I mean, we've been waiting for somebody to save us for like the last 10 years. I think probably, at least myself personally. Trump's gonna fix everything, right? No, that's not the case. We gotta grind. We gotta do some work. We gotta suffer a little bit. So in the meantime, please join me next Sunday at our regularly scheduled time, 11 a.m. And we will see what progress we've made. I am at earthvox on X, and that's pretty much the only place I am very active. Please like, share, and subscribe to the podcast on whichever platform you enjoy. The video is on YouTube, X, Twitch, and Rumble, and the audio version will be available shortly after this live stream ends on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and anywhere else you like to enjoy your audio podcasts. Marsha Michaelis, thank you very much again for joining us. Good times, great conversation. I'll be back.
Thanks very much.